what network firewall I would recommend, the first one is PFsence, which you can download from this site here, which looks like this. PFsence is a free open source firewall router software distribution based on FreeBSD. Unlike the custom router firmware, which we went through already, that is installed on routers, PFsence is installed on a computer, a PC, the sort of hardware that I've just gone through and just shown you. This is installed on that to make a dedicated firewall stroke router for a network. PFsence is based on the PF firewall, which we discussed already, which you know is for Mac OS X and BSD. PFsence is now much more than PF. As you can see, it has a nice interface and has many features. PFsence is a more powerful firewall and router than what you will get with DDWRT or OpenWRT, as they are pretty much just IP tables, and I highly recommend this PFsence. It has features usually found only in expensive commercial firewalls that you'd have to pay quite a lot of money for. PFsence could be used as a firewall and router in combination. It can be used as a DHCP server, pretty much all of the things that you would expect from a router and what will be running on your router now, like DNS server. But this also has things like you can install intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, like Snort. It can be used to isolate your network, so you can have trusted and untrusted devices. You can have virtual LANs, and it can act as a VPN client or a VPN server. In fact, it has many security features and services, and you can add more custom services to it as well. It works very well as a VPN client for establishing VPNs out of your network for privacy, which we discuss in its own section. So you could essentially have all of your traffic or some of your traffic going via a VPN. And you can customize it with customization. For example, you could put Tor on it. So you can make all of your traffic Torified via the firewall. They do have their own hardware options, which will make it easier for you to get it up and running, but they are actually quite expensive. If we look down here, you can click on more details. And you can see for the very basic, we're talking bottom price is $299, and that only has a WAN and a LAN, which is exactly why I showed you that other hardware, which gives you much more for your money. It is installed like any other operating system. Download the ISO and install it. It's free. Check out this link here to get it. And as I've shown you, this is what it looks like here. So system, configuring your interfaces, firewall, your rules, all the various services that you would expect that I've talked about. There we mentioned the VPN client, VPN server, lots of ways of looking at the status, diagnostic, etc. So a fully featured free firewall. There is actually another fork of PFsence that is supposed to be more open source, but I haven't actually used that, and that's this OPNsense. So if you're into the whole open source thing, you may prefer this as an option over PFsence. Another popular firewall, similar in its features to PFsence, is Smoothwall, and there is a free open source version, which is the Express option, which you can see here, and then there is the commercial version, which is a paid for version. This can be downloaded and installed on a PC, much the same as PFsence. Also of note is this one, which is VYOS. This is more of a Techie's Choice router firewall. It's a unified command line interface in the style of hardware routers like Cisco. So if you're a network engineer and you're used to Cisco, you'll be more familiar with this sort of a firewall. It can run as a virtual appliance on KVM, Xen, VMware, etc. There is a VM OVA file that you can download if you want to test it out, and you'll find that this runs very, very fast. And of course, we have just been talking there all about hardware firewalls as your network firewall. Instead of using hardware, you can actually use a virtual machine. Obviously, the virtual machine needs to be sat on hardware, and that hardware needs to be extremely fast, which will host a network-based firewall. You could use a Xen server for that, but like I said, the hardware would need to be quite a beast for it to support a router and a firewall, plus all of the other virtualization that you might be running on it. But that is an option. Is it worth having a network-based firewall? Well, on a home network, as we know, network address translation or NAT, because of that, there is no need for inbound from the internet to the LAN to be filtered or blocked using a firewall because NAT blocks it. Inbound filtering not required. But if you install an IDS or an IPS, intrusion detection system, intrusion prevention system like Snort, which you can do, for example, on PFsence, you can block inbound attacks that match certain attack signatures. So that's a use case for it. Outbound filtering is a viable security control for a network firewall. You could use this to lock down just the ports that you intend to use, like maybe you just surf the web, use Tor, VPNs and email, or whatever services you want. You would enable those, allow those, and block the rest. Certain devices that you don't want to use certain ports or services, you could block. You could, for example, force DNS to only go to the DNS servers that you want it to go to for privacy. You could even force DNS over VPN so that you get real privacy using a network-based firewall. You could block IPv6 at the firewall so that you can prevent VPN leakage at the network layer instead of on your host. You can block traffic that you don't like say, for example, you don't want people using torrents on your network. You can do cool things like limit bandwidth of some users on your network. Maybe you have a network user that streams videos and it's clogging up your network. You could reduce their bandwidth so other people can use the network. Features like that are available in routers, so it's not just exclusive to firewalls, but it's one reason why you might want to use a firewall. A more dedicated device will have more power. As you'll probably know already now, a network firewall won't help if internal malware uses ports you already have open, which is usually port 80 and 443. So it doesn't protect you against malware or adversaries that are already on your network or are attempting to gain a foothold through a vulnerability to create a reverse shell back to them, because it will just often use the web ports and ports that you already have open. So that outbound filtering that the firewall does is a weak protection against those sorts of attacks. However, if you're using an application firewall or you proxy the traffic, which you can do with these high-end dedicated devices and custom router firmware, PFsence, for example, does it, the results could be better for blocking the traffic because you can do some forms of deep packet inspection. The network firewall can be used to help monitor and log the network traffic. You can then see what might or might not be trying to attack you and maybe change what you're doing in order to counter that. This can be done with just a good router though, so it's not a service that just firewalls provide, but a dedicated firewall is just often more functional for logging and monitoring. For example, DDWRT versus PFsence. PFsence is better for logging and monitoring. A large use case for a network firewall is to help in the creation of network isolation, probably in combination with your switch, which we will discuss next. If you have a high need for security, privacy, and anonymity, a firewall will aid in that network isolation, and that will be useful for you. You can potentially do network isolation with just a good router that has some switch capability, but a dedicated firewall like PFsence can make things easier because you can use its functionality. So that's network firewalls, and we're going to talk more about network isolation next.